He tapped his glass like he'd been rehearsing it for years. The room went quiet. Then he smiled and said, "Our son deserved better. He married beneath him. We've always known it." My husband went pale, and that's when I reached into my bag. "My name is Simone. I'm 37 years old. And I need to tell you how I got to that moment, because it didn't start at that dinner table. It started long before, in a small apartment where my mother worked two jobs to keep the lights on, where I did homework by a window because the lamp was broken and we hadn't budgeted for a new bulb yet. I was the first person in my family to finish college. I put myself through a state school at night, studying accounting while waitressing on weekends. No connections, no safety net, just a plan and a stubborn refusal to quit. When I met Daniel, I fell in love with him, not his family's address. He was kind and funny and saw something in me that felt real. But his family, from the very first Sunday dinner, looked at me the way people look at a scratch on a new car. They were always polite, always cold. They called me sweet, the way you call something harmless, the way you call something small. I built a career in financial consulting quietly and seriously. I started investing on the side. Nobody in his family ever asked what I did with my time or my money, so I never told them. I wasn't glamorous. I didn't have their last name or their zip code. But I had 10 years of receipts, and they were about to see every single one. If you've ever been made to feel like you weren't enough for the family your partner came from, hit that subscribe button right now. Has someone's family ever looked at you like you didn't belong at their table? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. Let's go. The anniversary dinner was not my idea. I want to be clear about that. Gerald and Patricia, Daniel's parents, had booked a private dining room at a restaurant I would never have chosen, sent out invitations to the whole family without asking me, and presented it to Daniel as a gift. He told me about it 3 days before. He thought it was generous. I thought it was strange, but I went. I wore a blue dress and I smiled, and I sat down at a table that smelled like expensive candles and old money. Gerald stood up before the appetizers arrived. He had a glass of red wine, and the posture of a man who believed every room belonged to him. His toast started warmly enough, all charm and rehearsed sentiment about 10 years and family legacy. But then it shifted. "Daniel has always been generous with his heart," he said, looking around the table with a soft smile. "Sometimes too generous." A few people laughed nervously. Patricia looked at her plate. Daniel's sister, Renee, leaned over to a cousin and whispered just loud enough for me to catch it. He could have married Allison. She had a trust fund and everything. Then Gerald reached under his chair and produced a stack of small printed booklets. He passed them around the table like programs at a ceremony. Memory booklets, he called them. 10 years of Daniel's life, curated and printed. I flipped through mine quickly. Daniel was on nearly every page. I appeared in 2 photos and one caption that described me as the woman Daniel chose. Before I could process that, Gerald was speaking again, his voice dropping into a more serious register. He explained, been working with a family attorney to establish a financial trust, a structure to protect generational wealth. He named who would be included. He talked about bloodlines and legacy and responsibility. He never looked at me once. Then he reached into his jacket and slid a document across the table toward Daniel. A financial separation agreement, pre-drafted and tabbed for signatures. He was smiling like he was doing everyone a favor. I folded my hands in my lap. I looked at the document, then I looked up at Gerald, and I smiled right back. Daniel didn't say no that night. That was the first cut. On the drive home, I asked him directly what he was going to do about the document. He stared at the road and said he needed to think about it. He said his family just wanted to protect the legacy. The legacy. As if I were a liability. As if 10 years of building a life together counted for nothing against a printed family tree and a set of trust documents. I didn't yell. I went quiet. There's a kind of loneliness that settles in when you realize the person who was supposed to be on your side is still deciding which team he's on. I felt it that night like cold water filling a room slowly. The second cut came about a week later. Daniel had accidentally added me to the family group chat when trying to forward me a restaurant recommendation. He realized it immediately and removed me, but not before my phone had already downloaded 3 years of message history. I sat on the bathroom floor at 11 at night and I read it. There were jokes about where I grew up. There were bets, actual written bets with dollar amounts, about when Daniel would come to his senses. Patricia had a nickname for me in that chat. She called me the project, as in Daniel's project, as in something he had taken on out of misguided kindness. I read every message, then I took screenshots of all of it. The third cut came at a Sunday brunch 2 weeks later. Gerald arrived with news. He had hired a financial advisor, he announced over eggs and orange juice, to help Daniel properly manage his assets going forward. He said it casually, like it was a practical decision, like it had nothing to do with me. But I am a financial consultant. I manage other people's money for a living. Everyone at that table knew that. Patricia patted my hand and said, "No offense, dear. It's just that money management isn't for everyone." I took a slow sip of my coffee. I didn't argue, I didn't explain myself. I just started building. They thought my silence meant I was broken. It meant I was building. Here is what they never thought to look for. What they never once considered, because they had already decided who I was. 8 years ago, while I was still early in my consulting career, I started a personal finance blog under a pen name. It was small at first, just a way to process what I was learning, to write clearly about money in a way that regular people could understand. Then it grew. I started a YouTube channel under the same name. Then came the brand partnerships. Then the online courses. Then the affiliate income. By the time Gerald slid that document across the anniversary table, my anonymous channel was generating 6 figures a year. Every dollar in its own accounts, entirely in my name, entirely invisible to his family's calculations. What they didn't know was that every time they called me a burden, I was logging into a dashboard that told a very different story. And here is the part that still makes me catch my breath when I think about it. Patricia followed my channel. She had commented on one of my videos about estate planning 18 months earlier. She called the advice refreshingly practical. She had no idea she was complimenting me. I had saved that comment. I had saved the screenshots from the group chat. I had saved the printed memory booklet and a voice recording of Gerald's toast from that dinner, time-stamped and backed up. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being prepared. I called Diane the Monday after that brunch. Diane had been my professional mentor for over a decade, a semi-retired certified financial planner and business attorney who had helped me structure my online business in its early years. She was sharp and methodical, and she did not tolerate nonsense from anyone. I sent her everything. The group chat screenshots, the financial separation document Gerald had presented, a full summary of my independent holdings and the household's actual financial picture. She called me back 2 days later. "This document Gerald had drafted," she said, "is legally unenforceable as presented. But more importantly, Simone, do they have any idea what you're actually worth?" They did not. Diane helped me prepare a single clean financial disclosure. One document. Every account, every asset, every stream of income, all properly sourced and formatted, everything in my name. It was thorough. It was quiet. It was exactly the kind of document that changes the temperature of a room. Meanwhile, Gerald was moving forward with confidence. He told Daniel he had scheduled a formal meeting with the family attorney to finalize the trust structure. He framed it as routine. Patricia celebrated by coming over to our house one Saturday and rearranging the living room furniture while I was in the kitchen, explaining cheerfully that she had a few ideas for the space. She walked through my home like she was already measuring for curtains. They were certain they had won. They were certain Daniel would sign and I would accept it, and things would settle into the shape they had always wanted. That is the thing about arrogance. It makes you sloppy. The meeting was held in the family attorney's downtown office on a Thursday afternoon. Gerald had arranged it. He had specified who should attend. Daniel and Celeste, himself and Patricia, and the family attorney, a man named Stuart who had been handling Gerald's affairs for 15 years. I was invited as an afterthought. Gerald mentioned it to Daniel the night before, adding that I was welcome to sit in if I wanted to. I told Daniel I would be there. The office smelled like old paper and leather, and the particular stillness of a room where serious decisions get made. Stuart sat at the head of the table. Gerald sat at his right. Patricia folded her hands and smiled at me when I walked in, the same smile she always used, warm on the surface and made of nothing underneath. Gerald opened with a prepared speech. He talked about legacy and protection and the responsibility of wealth. He talked about Daniel's future. He did not mention my name once. Stuart began walking Daniel through the trust documents, explaining the structure, the exclusions, the rationale. He used the phrase financial dependent twice without looking at me. Then Gerald leaned forward and said, "Son, we just want to make sure your hard work is protected from outside variables." I let him finish. I waited until the room settled. Then I placed Diane's document on the table. "Before anyone signs anything," I said, "I think there are a few numbers worth reviewing." The document was clean and precise. 8 years of business income, investment accounts, property holdings, all of it premarital and marital, all of it documented, all of it mine. Stuart picked it up first. His expression shifted the way a doctor's face shifts when a test result surprises him. He read it carefully. Gerald's jaw tightened. Then I slid my phone to the center of the table. I had the channel's analytics dashboard open. And I had Patricia's comment pulled up and highlighted on the screen. "That's your mother's username," I said, looking at Gerald steadily. "She's been a subscriber for 3 years." Patricia looked at the screen. She looked at me. She did not speak. Daniel said, "Dad, stop," just that. 2 words, clear and final. I turned to Gerald and I kept my voice even. "I didn't marry your son for money, but I want you to understand something. I never needed yours." Stuart leaned over and said something quietly to Gerald. I heard enough. He was explaining that the trust restructuring, as drafted, could create legal complications given the scope of my independent assets. Gerald sat back in his chair. He looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting to be handed something and found it already gone. Nobody signed anything that day. The weeks after that meeting were not easy, and I won't pretend otherwise. Daniel and I had long, difficult conversations, the kind we should have had years earlier. He apologized for his silence. Not once, but repeatedly and in different ways, because I needed to hear it more than once. We started seeing a couples counselor. We are still going. I told a few close friends and professional contacts about the channel, quietly and on my own terms, not as a reveal but as a reclaiming. It was mine. It had always been mine. I just let it be mine openly now. Gerald has not apologized directly. I don't expect him to, but the dynamic changed completely after that Thursday. He speaks to me differently now, more carefully, with a caution that wasn't there before. Patricia asked me, about 6 weeks later, stiffly and without much warmth, for my thoughts on a financial decision she was facing. I answered her professionally and briefly. I did not make a moment of it. I don't need the apology anymore. What I needed was for them to understand, clearly and permanently, that I was never what they thought I was. They spent 10 years waiting for me to prove I wasn't enough. I spent 10 years building proof that I always was. If your partner's family has ever looked at you like you were a problem to be managed or a mistake waiting to be corrected, I want you to know I see you. Has your in-law family ever underestimated you or made you feel like you didn't belong? Drop your story in the comments. This community sees you. Subscribe and stay connected because quiet strength deserves to be celebrated loudly. Click hype to help this story reach every person who has ever been doubted by the people who were supposed to welcome them. Standing up for yourself is tough, especially when the damage is coming from the people who were supposed to be family. If you've been there, subscribe and become part of this community. Let me know this story helped by clicking hype. And tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel.